Hey guys, it's Kevin Gosmer for Hannibal, Season 3, Episode 3, Secondo. And this episode was everything I wanted this season to be, really. I mean, something that I really like that these first episodes have done, yeah, they have shown Hannibal most perspectives, but this is what I've wanted to see this season. I think now we're finally starting things, and I wasn't upset that, we weren't starting things. I was fine with, how slow-paced it was. But this is what I wanted this season, because finally we've brought all the story arcs together. We now get to see what's going on in every storyline, and the only character we still don't know about is Alana. Alana's the only character we don't know about. But what I'm sure they're gonna do is that looks like next week we're gonna find out what happened to Alana, and I'm fine with that because we find out what happened to Jack in this episode, which I will talk about. And overall, this was by far the best episode of the season. I absolutely loved it. I love what they're setting up. And let's just get into it because there's a lot to talk about. So, something that I was not sure about last week that I really want to address. If you guys can see my review for last week, I wasn't sure what was real and what was fake last week. I wasn't sure what was what was in Will's dream or if it was fake. I was pretty sure the scene between him and Hannibal was all fake. However, we start with Bedelia, who asked Hannibal right away if it was nice to see Will. So we see that this wasn't fake. They actually did meet, and he says it was nice, then wonders that he knew where to look for him, then tells her that Will forgave her, and she says forgiveness requires the betrayer and the betrayed to agree, then asks which he is. And I do agree what she says, that they both have to agree. And if you remember, Will really hasn't forgiven Hannibal yet. Hannibal forgave Will. I mean, basically, Will forgave Hannibal, but he hasn't really forgiven Will. So, he says he's vague on those details. She says betrayal and forgiveness are like falling in love. And I agree what she's saying. I mean, if you betray someone, you have to forgive them, and it's basically kind of like falling in love. I understand what she's saying there. And he says you can't control who you fall in love with, and she says he'll be caught, and that's it, already in motion. So, essentially, he basically has to apologize to Will no matter what. He basically has to do that. So Hannibal asks if that's concern for her patient or herself, and she says she has no concern about herself and says she knows how she'll navigate out of what she's getting herself into. Hang on one second, guys. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I had to get like a tissue and things like that. So basically, Hannibal asks if that's concern for her patient or herself, and she says she has no concern about herself, and says she knows how she'll navigate out of what she's gotten herself into. And we still don't know if she's working for Hannibal or against him. At this point, I'm kind of thinking she's playing both sides. I really do. She asks if he knows, and he says he did. She asks where Will look for him next, and he says someplace he can never go home. And we see right away that Will is still in the chapel, and he sees muddy water. He slogs through it, and then we see him at the gates to a large home, and it has the Lecter family crest on the gates. And he tries the gates, but they're locked, and he scales the fence, goes over into the property, and something I love about this episode is that we find out a lot more about Hannibal's past in this episode. It's not something I necessarily, was asking for, but it's something I definitely appreciated, and I think they did it very well in this episode. So, He scales the fence, goes over into the property. The house looms in the distance. It's a Lithuania way out in a sparsely populated area. There are no other houses nearby. It's foggy as he draws closer and tries the door. It's locked. He walks around the manor and then sees a small cemetery. And he goes to check it out, walks among the graves. There are stones, monuments of all types, and one has Hannibal's sister name on it, Mischa Lecter. Now, who knew that Hannibal had a sister? That I thought was really interesting because, I mean, I never even thought of that possibility of Hannibal having a sister, but that definitely really got me interested. I'm like, okay, I really want to see this now. Again, not something I asked for, but I thought they handled it really well. So, Hannibal says it's not healing to see your child at home. He's talking to Will, but but the question is, is he really there? Because I'm not sure if Hannibal's, like, imagining this at this point, and he asks Hannibal if this is where his memory palace begins construction, and Will says the spaces in his mind devoted to his earliest years, are they different, the other rooms? And basically he asks if they're different than this room, and they sit in Hannibal's old house chanting. Back in the past, Hannibal talks about how some rooms are fragmentary, like painted glass, and some are static, and Will asks about rooms, and he can't bring himself to go into. And Hannibal says screams fill some of those places, but don't echo in the corridors, and says he hears music. So now we see that that was a flashback. Basically, that's what Will was thinking of. So Will hears shots fired and grabs his bags, run to see the source of the sound. He sees someone with a gun and checks through his binoculars, and it's this woman. And he takes a shot and he hides. She lowers the gun, and Will watches as she walks on. She kneels, picks up the bird she shot, and I thought that was a really thrilling scene because you don't know if like she's shooting at Will, but it's like no, she's shooting at this bird. So you can definitely tell that this is not a place where they normally get a lot of guests. They're probably very isolated. And back at the house, the woman pulls out the feathers from the bird, hangs it up. He watches her through his binoculars looking outside. She takes the cleaver to it and chops off its legs. So right away we see that she is basically, killing these animals, and we don't know why. So Hannibal uses a cleaver to slice an arm, and it's from the torso he left for Will. And the man and woman's actions parallel each other as each prepares a meal. And I've always loved the way they handle that, where like they'll show something and then they'll cut to a scene and then a character will be doing something similar. So Bedelia carries the platter to the table while Hannibal chips ice. He has some Sagalato there for dinner, and says he seemed eager to discredit him. And Sagalato says he sang for his supper, and Bedelia said he did well. Hannibal prepares a cocktail. He says he was served at Titanic's last dinner, and Sagalato toasts to the new curator and says he doesn't miss the old one. And Hannibal says he couldn't tell if the committee was pleased with him. And then he puts the ice pick through the man's temple and sits to eat. And you can tell that he doesn't care if he kills people or not at this point. So, basically, he tells Bedelia that may have been impulsive. She says she's been pondering his impulsiveness since he decided to serve Punch Romaine. Because, again, Hannibal doesn't want anyone to know about his past, so that's why he killed him. And basically, we see he's not alive. Because Sagala is giggling and says he can't see. He's choking and coughing, and Bedelia goes over, pulls out the pick, and he falls to the table, and Hannibal tells her that technically she killed him, which I thought that was really kind of funny when he said that. That's something I like that they're doing this season, that they're trying to get, like, some more humor in there, and honestly, that was pretty funny. So she says he's no longer interested in preserving the peace, which he's not. I mean, he said to her, I'm gonna try not to kill as many people. Well, I guess fuck that, because he just killed that guy. And he says entropy dissolves into disorder. She says 2 men from the museum are dead, and says he can only take credit for one, technically. She has if he's drawing them to him, all of them. And you can see that definitely he's trying to make Bedelia very much like him, and she's trying not to do that. So then we find out that Jack Crawford's alive, and this scene was awesome. I love the way they handle it, because he's at the church where Hannibal left his broken heart, and human sculpture for Will, and he sits in a pew looking at the crime scene photos, and Pazzi sits by him. So this confirms that, yes, what happened with Pazzi was real. And so pretty much we see that everything that happened last week was real, besides what happened with Abigail. That's what I'm thinking, at least. So Jack says Hannibal's needs don't force him to strike on too often, and Pazzi says this is the first in 20 years. He says the window is garlic to keep out evil spirits, and says the city mocks him with their old ideas, and he asks about Jack's heart. He says it's well packed. He says Il Mostro will return to Florence if he hasn't already, and he asks Jack to come with him and says they can regain their reputations by capturing him. So Jack says he's not there for Il Mostro. He says it's not his house or his fire, and says he's just there for Will because he doesn't know where Will is, obviously, because they're separated and everything. And I kind of like how separate all the characters are. And I mean, they're all kind of looking for something, and I feel like Jack's gonna help out Will, find Hannibal and things like that. But they're gonna find Il Mostro along the way. I mean, that's something that has to happen, right? I mean, with this, the Red Dragon, so. Will sits by a fire in the woods. He hears a noise, turns with his flashlight lit. He stomps out the fire and goes searching for the source of the noise. And fireflies are surrounding him. And I love how creepy this scene was. I mean, this scene honestly was pretty creepy. So he's looking around at them. He walks through the trees, looks at the gathering of the insects, and sees a fountain in the clearing. It's overgrown and wild looking. He kneels and looks at the water, and he sees this snail on a branch and more fireflies. He looks about the carving at the center of the fountain, and the woman lights a lantern in the house, then puts her bird into the wood, burning stove to cook. He sees her come in and out of a building with a lantern, and we don't know who this woman is, which I think is interesting the way they did this. So he looks very close to the house and goes inside when she leaves. He sees more snails. There are candles lit all over. Then he hears this man's voice. And there's a man behind bars who seems scared. And we don't know if this is because of Hannibal or why he's there or if this woman did this to him. We don't really know anything right now. So, but you definitely know that there's definitely something going on here. So Will hears the rifle cock and he turns. The man blathers on in Italian and she tells Will you're upsetting him. She tells Will he's trespassing and he says he's a friend of Hannibal's. She asks if he sent him. He tells her his name and says he's unarmed. And she tells him that the trigger is light she's holding. He asks what the man is saying, and she says he wants him to look at him and speak to him. But then he tells Will that he won't do it. And Will says she's cast aside the social graces afforded to human beings. And she says the man has cast them aside, and all he has is the sound of running water. So Will says she's keeping him like an animal, but she says she wouldn't do this to an animal, and she doesn't really see a problem what she's doing. So Will keeps his hands up and walks out of the place, and obviously he's freaked out. So the man watches him go with desperate eyes. They walk outside. Will asks what the man did. She says he ate her, and he asks if she means Mischa. And he asks how long he's been prisoner. And she says they have been each other's prisoner for a very long time. And I'm like, what? That doesn't make sense. He asks how she found herself in that situation, and she says that question belongs to both of them. He asks her name, and she says it's Chiyoh. She asks how he knows Hannibal, and he says intimately. She says Nakama, and says it's Japanese for very close friends. He says that describes it, and he says he left him with a smile last he saw, and Hannibal then lifts his shirt to show her the scar. She lowers her gun and says all sorrows can be borne if you put them in a story. She tells Will to tell her a story. Hannibal cuts open the body, talks about how a carcass was decided in olden times based on your rank in life. And they have a couple as guests. And Bedelia smiles politely at them. And basically we see that all this is real. Basically they're talking now, and Hannibal says when the Luns whistle, the dish is done. They tell him it's rude of Sagalato not to attend the dinner. The woman says the wine is divine, and Hannibal engages them, and he says he prepared this dish in honor of his sister. And Bedelia says she's sure he's perfected the recipe over the years. She watches as Sagalato's colleague dine on his flesh with great pleasure, ignorant to what they eat, and the woman raves about the meat, and the man says Hannibal is a very good butcher. He says he does, and he oversees the process of the meat carving personally. So Will tells Chiyoh that our minds construct fantasies when we don't want to believe something, and she says she accepts what Hannibal has done and why. And I agree with what Will said. I mean, think of what he was imagining last week. He was imagining that he saw Abigail. He didn't want to think that she was dead, and we still don't know if she's dead or not. We just know that she's in the hospital. So he says Mischa doesn't quantify what he's done, but she says he does what was done for her. Will asks how she knows her prisoner killed Mischa, and she says Hannibal told her. So she says Hannibal took someone from him, then asks if he's there to take something from Hannibal. And Will says if he was like Hannibal, he would have killed her already. Cooked her, ate her, and fed what was left of her to him, which is true. I mean, if Hannibal thinks that someone knows his secrets, he just kills them, and he says that's what Hannibal would do. And she says he's given it some thought, and Will asks if she knows where he is. She asks why he's looking for Hannibal after he left him with a smile, and he says he's never known himself as well as he did when he's with him. And Chiyoh says he won't find Hannibal there. She says there are places on these grounds he cannot safely go because of bad memories. She says Hannibal wanted to kill the man for what he did to Mischa, but she wouldn't let him, so Hannibal left his life with her. And Will says he was curious if she would kill, and he imagines that Hannibal still is. So we see Bedelia in the tub, and Hannibal washing her hair gently. She asks what he was like as a young man. He says he was contemptuous of Faust and rooting for, Mephistopheles, I think that's how you pronounce it. She asks if he'd like to talk about it, his first spring lamb, and he asks if she would like to, and she asks why he can't go home. Why can't he go home? And she asks what happened to him there, and he says he happened. She stares up at him, then asks how his sister tasted. She sinks below the water as she stares up at him, then under the water and out of sight. The cage man paces and eats a snail he plucks from the wall. He sees the flashlight, and then Will is there and breaks his lock. He bags the man's head, takes him out, and he sets the man free. So the man tries to follow him, but Will yells at him to go, and basically he's freed him. So, and you can really see this look on this man's face. I mean, you can clearly see that really no one has helped out this guy, and finally Will's come to help him. So Jack lights a candle at the church, and Pazzi asks if he's a believer. Jack says belief comes with imagination, and they all imagine they live on after death. And he says Will Graham died and says they were both dead and didn't imagine it. And Pazzi asks what Will imagines now. And Jack says he borrowed Will's imagination, broke it, and doesn't know how he put it back together. And Pazzi says people come there to be closer to God. He says Will understands and accepts Hannibal. He accepts that Hannibal, did what he did. And he says everyone wants understanding and acceptance, and that honestly goes with, this show. I mean, there are a lot of things that I don't fully understand in this show. Like, how did Hannibal see Will if Will's still looking for Hannibal? I don't fully understand it. And it's not so much understanding, it's more of acceptance, and I like the shows doing that. So, Chiyoh makes a pie from her bird and goes to serve it to the cage man. He lunges at her through the unlocked door, chokes her, he curses at her and says she's sorry. She goes limp, and she stabs the man as he chokes her. He gurgles as blood spills out, then goes limp. Really graphic scene, I have to say. And she screams, and Will hears her. He goes to see her. She says that he set him free, and Will says it was her he wanted to set free. She says he told her Hannibal was curious if she would kill. She says Will was curious too. He says, but he didn't want this, and says she says he is doing what Hannibal does, and she says Hannibal would be proud of his nakama. And Will asks if she knew, and says at some level she must have known. So Will's thinking that maybe she knows what Hannibal did to Will, which I think is really interesting. So he picks up a bottle of wine, opens it with his knife. He says Hannibal created a story of events only he experienced, and quotes her about, and also I think she knows that Will set this guy free because he didn't tell her, obviously. So he talks about a Hannibal created a story of events only he experienced and quotes her about sorrows being born in a story. She drinks deeply from the bottle, then looks at the dead man, and she says for Mischa, and she stands and takes her gun. She tells Will she'll help him find him, and he asks why she would. She says she has no reason to stay there anymore, and he saw to that. And Will takes a bottle of wine, bashes it. He strings the man up after he prepares the body as a showpiece. He's rigged the man to have wings that spread wide, and Will looks at the winged creature he's created, and it's morbidly beautiful. And Hannibal should appreciate, and Chiyoh looks at what he's made, and basically they're going to go find Hannibal together. So Bedelia talks to Hannibal about his sister. She says what Will makes him feel is like that feeling, and says it's a force of mind and circumstance. I like how even though Bedelia is not his therapist, she's still giving him therapy. Like, she definitely is still giving him therapy. I really feel like that's her angle here, just to help him out. What I think she's going to do is, motivate him and then cut him loose. Because there's no way she wants him to kill Will. Obviously, there's no way. So Hannibal says love, and he says love pays you a visit or doesn't. She says the same with forgiveness and betrayal. Hannibal plays piano as she talks. She says they can all betray, and sometimes they have no other choice. He says Mischa didn't betray him and influenced him to betray himself, but he forgave her. We still don't know why he did this. I feel like we're definitely going to get a flashback episode as to why all that happened. And she says if past behavior is an indicator of future behavior, there's only one way he'll forgive Will. And I love the way the episode ends because he finishes his concerto and he realizes that in order for him to do this, he has to eat Will, just like he did with Mischa, because that relieved him and basically gave him peace by doing that, and he has to do that to Will, and that's how the episode ends. So overall, guys, I really enjoy this episode. I did. I mean, I love how psychological this season is. I still don't fully understand everything that's going on. I mean, I sort of do, but let's talk about Bedelia and Will. I mean, Bedelia and Hannibal. I really feel like her angle here is just to help out Hannibal. You know, she's trying to be his therapist still and give him that therapy that he needs, and then eventually when he's ready to, do what he does to Will, she'll cut him loose. I really feel like that's what's going to happen. However, I feel like Hamill's sort of trying to make Bedelia into a killer. I mean, what he said to her I like that he told her, look, you killed that guy, which, yeah, she did. She didn't try to stop him. She didn't try to do anything about it, and she hasn't. So I definitely feel like it definitely is working. He's definitely changing her into this killer. It definitely is working. So Will and Chiyoh, I don't really know where they're going to go, but definitely, I'd like to know why Hannibal killed Mischa, because we didn't really get a reason why that all happened, which I think is interesting that we didn't actually find out why he killed Mischa. Would you guys want a flashback episode on that? Me, personally, I don't think we need to see it. The thing I like about the show is that it very descriptively tells you what happened, rather than shows you. I honestly would like to see some flashbacks, so I think that would be well done if they did that. And this has never been a flashback heavy show, but I think it'd be kind of cool if they did that just to see, what's going on there. Chiyoh. Was Chiyoh responsible for what happened between Mischa and Hannibal? Obviously, she knows what's going on there. Is she going to find out that Will set that guy free? I mean, obviously, she's going to freak out if he did. My only thing with Chiyoh is that we don't know too much about her character. She doesn't stand out much from Hannibal. She's pretty much just like Hannibal, and I don't really see many differences from her. I'd like to see more of her character and find out more about her, because I don't really know how to feel about Chiyoh. She's a good character, I just don't really know how to feel about her yet, that's personally how I feel about her character, at least. But I do think it's interesting that Will's going to go find Hannibal. However, Hannibal already talked to him, or was that just through his mind? Was that, like, through his mind or something? Maybe he just confronted Will in his mind and things like that. I don't actually think these two met up. I don't think they do. I think that what happened is that he just talked to Hannibal through, like, his mind palace, as Hannibal said. That's really what I think is going on. I think Hannibal is psychologically talking to him. I think Will definitely knows this, but, Will has such a complicated mind that I definitely feel like that's what's going on there. I mean, Will's basically created an alternate reality in his mind. Also, Pazzi and Will, did they actually start this case of finding Il Mostro? I feel like Jack and Pazzi, they're definitely going to find Il Mostro, and we'll have to see what happens there with Il Mostro. Il Mostro and Hannibal, if these two meet up, they're probably going to team up. I mean, they're very similar, definitely, and I'm very interested in seeing what's going to happen there. And I definitely feel like Hannibal's going to be responsible for the reason why Pazzi turns into the Red Dragon, because that's really interesting. Is Jack going to find out where Will is and find out what's going on with him? I mean, all he really needs to do is just go to the same place Will is, and, I mean, he's in that church that Will was in, so we'll have to see where that leads him to. If he goes to that same place where Chiyoh was, we'll have to see what happens there. But I like how separate everyone is right now. You definitely get a sense of, it definitely is different for the show for everyone to be separate, because this has been a show where, like, everyone's been close together. Again, the only character we don't know what's happened to them is Alana. Next week's episode looks amazing, though, because I guess next week's going to be, like, the revenge episode, and I don't think that they're going to meet up with Hannibal yet. I feel like they're definitely trying to be slow-paced about it, and I definitely feel like the end of the season, that's when that'll start. But I guess we're going to find out what happened to Alana. And also, is Abigail dead? I don't think she is. I think she's just in the hospital right now. And I like they're not giving us many answers about that as well. They're definitely giving us a lot more questions and a lot less answers, which I do like, because they have 13 episodes. They have 11 more episodes. They can basically drag out the story if they want to. I'm perfectly fine if they want to do that. Which I think is really interesting, definitely. And I guess my only other thing I guess I'm going to ask is, like, with Will, is he just going to let Hannibal eat him? I mean, Hannibal obviously wants to eat Will, but there's no way that Will's going to do that, because I definitely feel like these two are going to fight or something. I definitely feel like, the fight we got between Jack and Hannibal last year? That's going to happen with Will and Hannibal this year. I definitely feel like that's going to happen. I mean, I get that Will does forgive Hannibal psychologically, but in reality, there's no way he's going to let Hannibal get away with this. There's just no way. I think, the whole forgiving Hannibal, what they're trying to say there is that he forgives him for what he did so he can move on from it. That really is what it is. He can't move on from what he did. Obviously, he wants to go after Hannibal and kill him, but we'll have to see, I guess, what happens there. So overall, guys, I really love this episode. Best episode so far. Really enjoying this season. Let me know what you guys saw this episode. I will see you guys in my next video, which will be my review for Daredevil, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.